In today's video, we've got one of the reasons that I turn off the spelling and grammar checker and why you might want to also. So the other day, I was finishing up the first chapter of my dissertation and I decided to take the spell checker out for a quick loop because I just wasn't in the mood to proofread over 20,000 words for a few stray typos. Of course, it flagged a lot of the last names that I used to cite my sources, but it also did a pretty good job of catching a few innocent errors, like letters that were out of place, or even a couple of spots where I'd written the word "the" twice in a row. But then it opened up a whole section that it called refinements, which I understood to mean stylistic improvements. And because I'm a person who studies writing style, I was curious to see what kinds of suggestions the robot in my computer would have to improve my style, and it turns out that the robot thought that I had lessened my impact by expressing uncertainty a bunch of times. Now, to be clear, the chapter that I had just written was not a bunch of wishy-washy low-impact fluff. It was just standard academic writing that made occasional use of qualifiers, which are a tool that responsible writers use all the time. So today I want to have a little chat about those qualifiers and explain what they are, why they're good, and how you can use them responsibly and effectively in your writing. And I'm sure it's going to be a hoot, so let's get right to it. A qualifier is a word that lessens the intensity or certainty of a claim that you're making. So when you use a qualifier, you're hedging your bets and taking a step back from committing fully to whatever it is that you have to say. Qualifiers are easy to spot. They're words like somewhat, maybe, kinda, perhaps, likely, possibly, seems, could be, or suggests. And at their most basic, just like my robot friend was saying, qualifiers are used to express uncertainty. So instead of saying that is a terrible idea, you might say that seems like a terrible idea. Or instead of declaring that ice cream is the best food, you might say it is highly likely that ice cream is the best food. In each of these cases, the qualifiers introduce an amount of uncertainty into the claims, making them less of a guaranteed thing. So of course my robot friend was right to say that the qualifiers I was using expressed uncertainty, but it was wrong to say that it was always a bad thing to do, because like every meaningful part of a language, we have qualifiers for a pretty good reason. Every semester, I have students who write variations of this sentence. My source proves that what I'm saying is true. And every semester, I take the opportunity to teach those students about the value of qualifiers with a comment like this. Prove means that you have 100% certainty, which is actually pretty hard to come by. Words like suggest or demonstrate are far more common in academic writing, and they make it harder for your readers to challenge your claim. So when you express something with 100% certainty, then you'd better make sure that you have the evidence to back up that claim. But like I tell my students, that kind of proof is vanishingly rare. If you're going to say that your claim is proven 100% true, and then you have a reader find a single piece of evidence to the contrary, then your whole argument is going to fall apart. But now what happens if you take a step back and say that your claim is very likely true, even 99.999% guaranteed? Well, then you've qualified your claim and made your argument more resilient in the face of potential challenges. So imagine that your local meteorologist says that it will not rain today, full stop. If you go out and it rains for 15 minutes in the afternoon while you're walking to class, you might be pretty upset. That weather report was a lie. But if the meteorologist says that it probably won't rain because there's only a 12% chance of precipitation, and then you leave home without an umbrella because you like those odds but then get rained on that afternoon, well, you probably won't be as upset at the meteorologist. You couldn't call them a liar, you could only call yourself unlucky. And that's the rhetorical beauty of the qualifier. By giving yourself room for uncertainty, you're being honest about the limitations of your argument, and that makes your audience more likely to accept rather than challenge the claims that you make. Now, if you've spent much time reading scientific writing, then you may be familiar with p-values. Those are statistical values that tell researchers how likely it was that their results happened by chance. The lower the p-value, the less likely it is that their results were an accident. And p-values are never zero, so even scientists who have stunning, groundbreaking results still don't have 100% certainty, but that doesn't mean that their findings are useful. They've got strong evidence, and there's a high probability that their results are in fact true, so there's no reason not to act on their findings. But this is also why scientists always say that the data suggest, show, or demonstrate something rather than prove it. So qualifiers do express uncertainty, but that's a feature and not a bug. When you express reasonable uncertainty, you're being more honest with your audience, and that's good for your ethos, and it also makes it harder for critics to challenge your argument, which is good overall. An argument without qualifiers is pretty brittle, but if you throw a few qualifiers in, you can make your argument much more durable. Now, it's worth pointing out that you could end up qualifying yourself out of saying anything meaningful. If you were, for example, to write something like, perhaps it could probably seem very likely to suggest a possible outcome of potential harm, you've given your claim so much wiggle room that it's in the void of not mattering at all. So, while my robot friend was out of line to say that all of my qualifiers were damaging my writing, it is possible to go overboard, and whether or not you've crossed that line will of course depend on context. For example, it was pretty clear that my word processor had the business world in mind and not an academic dissertation. Researchers and scholars use lots of qualifiers because they need to communicate their findings accurately. Marketing executives, on the other hand, want to sound bold and confident, so I suppose if I had been writing a marketing pitch, I would have used fewer qualifiers than I did when I was writing a case study. But at the same time, I once had a professor write on a draft that I was a very polite writer, which I think was just a very gentle way of saying that I was using too many qualifiers. And to be fair, I was extra worried about that person's criticism, so I think I overqualified my claims out of a little bit of fear. So know your audience and know your purpose. If you're writing in an academic setting, you'll want to use plenty of qualifiers wherever there's room for uncertainty. If you don't, you can be sure that people are going to whine about it. But if you're writing for regular people, you may not need to use as many. And perhaps most importantly, don't feel bad about using qualifiers, especially when the little robot in your word processor is yelling at you for doing it. The reality is that audiences will probably be more likely to listen to what you're saying when you use qualifiers because it shows that you're being thoughtful and realistic about your argument and its limitations. And in that sense, using qualifiers could actually increase the impact of your writing because it shows your readers that you're trustworthy. So friends, in the end, it turned out that my spelling, grammar, and style checker was, well, just wrong, which isn't really a surprising conclusion, but it is, with little room for doubt, a conclusion nonetheless. So thanks for sticking around to hear the whole story. And of course, the moral is that you should use qualifiers to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room with the critics and to be honest with your readers, because it's just good rhetorical practice. After all, just remember that even though what counts as close enough may vary from one situation to another, it's probably as good as we'll ever get, and it's likely all you'll ever need. We're all just trying to do our best, and qualifiers keep us honest about it. So thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.